All right, last talk of the day, and there are more than 5 people in the room. This is amazing. Yes! All right. Hi, I am Amanda, and I'm going to talk to you today about the fun and exciting things that I have learned on my journey working in insurance. I know you thought that was going to be awesome, right? But really though, I had we had interesting talks earlier about career pathways into cyber, and I took the simultaneously easy and hard path. I joined the military. Thought it was totally going to be for like just one contract. Yet 20 years later, I'm deciding what the heck I'm actually going to do when I grow up. And so managed to land a job with Liberty Mutual Insurance, please no singing, and and learned how cyber insurance works and how insurance companies make their decisions about whether to underwrite a company or not, or how to adjust their rates and all of those fun and exciting things. And so using that data on how insurance works to inform you on how to prioritize your defensive measures within your organizations. And why does this matter? Well, if we're going to be honest, the regulatory space is not great right now. There's a lot of fracturing. Within the US, each state has its own policies about whether to notify about a data breach, when not to notify, whether you're required to pay for credit monitoring, all those sorts of things. And then when you look at the international space, it gets even worse because there are very solid laws for some sorts of data in some countries, GDPR being the obvious one. In other areas, all you have is some slight protections about health data, like HIPAA here in the US. So we don't have really good regulatory coverage, and so insurance becomes kind of that great leveler. It becomes the market forces that can be used in order to encourage organizations to do better, to enact particular policies. And so we get to provide those financial incentives. For instance, if you think back several years, multifactor authentication, like most of us in the room knew it was really important, but businesses weren't adopting it because why would you? Until insurance started requiring it. And today, it is almost impossible to get a cyber insurance policy if you don't have multi-factor authentication, at least for your remote access into your network. And so thinking about that, as I'm taking on this job, I was like, well, what are the other things that are important? And so I looked at some of the companies that do risk modeling. And they look primarily at insurance claims. And what they have done is publish some of their reports about what they see as important based on how it correlates to whether an organization had a cyber claim or not. And so you all get to learn the top 5 defenses of 2024. Number 5, patching, which is a surprise to no one in this room. If anything, you're surprised that it's number 5 and not like number 1, right? And this was really interesting because first, this is actually a little bit higher than it might otherwise be if it weren't for one particular vulnerability, which is on the screen there. Anyone know offhand what that one was? No. Think mass supply chain, like SolarWinds is the right field, but nope, not quite that deep. MOVEit. MOVEit resulted in a lot of claims, a lot of very expensive claims. And so that actually kind of skewed the data from 2023. If it weren't for that one vulnerability, patching might not rate as high as it does. Also, it's worth noting that in a lot of organizations, their internal and external vulnerability management programs are very different things. When I'm doing assessments, a lot of times I'll see organizations that are like, yes, we patch everything, within 30 days, critical patches within 7 days, we have an emergency patching procedure, and this, that, the other. I'm like, awesome. Tell me about your external patching. We do vulnerability scans quarterly. But that external is your attack surface. It's one of the ways in which threat actors can get into your networks. And so, in my humble opinion, it deserves at least as much love as your internal vulnerability management program. And it's also really interesting reading reports that were published a year and more ago about the importance of boundary devices and patching those boundary devices, because, oh boy, has 2024 been a fun and exciting year for boundary devices. Those firewalls, those VPNs, all those gateway devices, all those directory traversals. Great day to be a red teamer, let me tell you. I am not a red teamer. So, number 4, website certificates. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, wait a second. Just because a certificate's old, or, like their SSH supports old versions, that doesn't mean that's how you get into these networks, and you are correct. But remember what I said. This data isn't collected from how threat actors got into networks. This is correlations to claims. And the theory here is that when we're looking at all these certificate issues, it's something that is very easy for organizations to do wrong. Like, who really thinks that they do a good job of certificate management at the enterprise level? There are 0 hands raised in this room. Shock. They are hard. But each organization is going to fail at them in different ways. And the way and scale at which an organization fails at managing its certificates is going to tell me a lot about how that organization manages hard things, about their ability to do details well. And so, yes, this is not necessarily the cause of insurance claims, but if you're doing poorly at this, what else are you doing poorly at? Probably patching, probably a whole lot of other detail-oriented things. And the devil is absolutely in the details in this field. Number 3, surprise to no one, exposed ports, attack surface. If you don't need it, please lock it down. Please, 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 please. And when I am looking at organizations, I see all sorts of weird exposed ports. I'm going to see legacy services, things like Telnet, remote management, not just RDP, things like VNC, Dameware. Literally just yesterday I saw a system with Dameware on it. I'm like, oh, why? Why is this still being installed? I'll see unpatched services, internet servers running IIS 6. We're on 10. Why are you running 6? Things where I have to ask questions about why this is even running in enterprise environments. And yes, I have seen Minecraft running in enterprise environments on more than one occasion, and I've only been doing this job since December. And I realize I'm preaching to the choir here, but any time that you can reduce attack surface by turning a service off, that's one less thing you have to patch. It is saving administrator time when you disable these services. Turn off anything you don't need, please, please. Number 2, compromised systems. Again, I need to remind you, these are indicators that correlate with claims. And if there are indicators of compromise emanating from your network, if you haven't had a claim already, you probably will soon. So what do I mean by that? Things like mass scanning of the internet originating from your network. If you are not explicitly conducting network research, why are you scanning the internet? Do you know you're scanning the internet? Would your organizations like to know if they're accidentally scanning the internet? Yeah. A lot of organizations don't know that they're scanning the internet. Not a great day. And this brings up one of my personal favorite network controls. Outbound web proxies would kill so much of this traffic so that even if you have compromised systems, they can't touch anything. Anything that you can do to filter and monitor that outbound web traffic, like we all know border firewalls are great. Block everything inbound, cool. But you also need to block your outbound. Not everything needs to be allowed outbound by default. And so anytime that you can kill that, please do that. What I also suspect I'm seeing sometimes in that is not just that they've been compromised, but they don't know yet, but they may have failed to fully kick out the threat actor from their last compromise. And this is one of the things that I have to explain to my underwriters, and they're like, oh, lightning wouldn't strike twice, would it? Again, we all know this, but not everyone in our leadership positions in our organizations does. And so being able to show them with data that they've got some problems is really useful. So we've gotten through 4 of the top 5. Do you have any idea what number 1 is going to be? Number 1 thing that correlates with claims. Local admin access, what was over here? MFA. Human error, lack of training. Social. Insider risk. Disgruntled employees. Okay, so I will admit that I cheated somewhat because this list of 5 are all things that can be seen from the outside of an organization. And all the things that you talked about are all things that you'd have to be inside the organization to see. The number 1 thing that we can see from outside the organization that correlates with insurance claims is firmographics. What the heck are firmographics? Firmographics is the fancy pants word for information about a company. So it's corporate metadata, if you will. Things like what industry are they in? For instance, if you currently work in education or healthcare, I'm sorry. If you work in the government, you just know that you're going to be targeted. If you're working in manufacturing, you're having a little bit better time. But the number 1 thing that correlates with insurance claims is revenue. The higher your revenue, the higher your likelihood of experiencing a claim. So if you want to reduce your risk, make less money. Yeah, since that is not going to work, it's worth explaining why this is a thing, because you may have seen data and reports talking about how the vast majority of incidents are small businesses, right? That's not wrong, but also the vast majority of businesses are small businesses. And so if you look at the proportion of small businesses that have cyber incidents to the total number of small businesses and compare that to, say, the total number of large businesses versus the large businesses that have incidents, you are much more likely to get compromised if you are a large business. And this makes sense. It's a classic, why do you rob banks? It's where the money is. And so if you are targeting a company trying to get that big payout, and who boy have some ransom actors have gotten some big payouts this year, you're going after those large mega corporations. You're going after the household names, or the ones that aren't household names, but it turns out completely underpin entire industries. That's who you go after. You don't go after the $50 million revenue company. So I've talked a bunch about some different things, and there's some warnings here. First, as I keep saying, this data is limited to insurance claims. That means if it's a company that did not have cyber insurance, it's not in this data set. If it is an incident that did not result in a claim, if the company did not claim it on their insurance for whatever reason, because below thresholds or what have you, also not in this data set. Also, as I mentioned, I cheated a little bit and looked at outside-in data. The data you're able to collect from inside an organization is very different, and we're going to talk about that here shortly. Also, it is really, 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 really important that you understand that the majority of claims aren't from hackers breaking into a network. It's business email compromise. It's fraudulent funds transfer. It's that social engineering threat. And so all the technical controls in the world do not stop one of your finance employees using their authorized access to do the thing that they do every day, but to the wrong account, unless there are explicitly financial controls. But those aren't cybersecurity controls, but they also show up in this data. So, as mentioned, I've been talking about outside-in data. Now we can look at that interior data. Unfortunately, I do not live in the world where I have a magic little doohickey that I can plug into my customer's network, like the thing that you can optionally do for car insurance to get a better rate and see your driving habits. Like, I would love to be able to just magically see my customers' network habits. That's not going to happen for a variety of reasons. And so what we have in absence of that is a self-assessment questionnaire. If you have filled out one of these questionnaires, first off, I am kind of sorry, especially the one that's like over 100 pages long. But also, thank you for your time. Thank you for filling that out well, because those help me a ton. And that is where we get to talk about things like MFA. And I alluded to this a little bit, but right now it's almost impossible to get insurance if you don't have multi-factor authentication on at least your remote access to your network. Not all organizations do MFA for all things. Many organizations still believe that once you're inside the network perimeter, it's totally fine, we don't need MFA anymore. I am working very hard to educate my customers about this thing called lateral movement. It is a slow process. Things like hardened system baselines. Anytime that I can set a baseline so that you, the security analyst, can know, something changed, because change tells you something. And so those are really important controls for organizations to have. Privileged account management, credentialed storage. I would love if every organization had passwords of at least 15 characters. Again, fights I am fighting. And things like your incident response, your business continuity, your disaster recovery planning. Do you have plans? Do you exercise them? Do you have backups? Have you tested restoring from backup? Have you tested rebuilding your systems? Do you know where the media is to rebuild your systems? Do you know where the media is to rebuild your legacy systems? Because, that is something that causes incidents to stretch on and on. finding the expertise in the media to rebuild the system that has been happily chugging away for 15 years. Because why would you still have the media for that? And in all of this, there's questions that aren't really being asked today. Things like organizational culture, obligatory self-promotion as part of my team's efforts to get out Cybersecurity Awareness Month, yay, doing a series of blog posts on LinkedIn. I did one on organizational culture, highly recommend. Please, like and interact and comment and make my marketing people happy. But culture is super important. If you are an organization that doesn't necessarily have all the technical controls, but you're investing in growing your people, and you have a learning mindset, and you give me signals that you get it, even if you don't have all the magical technical controls, but you're like, yeah, I have a person, we don't have a SIM, but this is just a deity with log management, like they can just find anything they want in the logs, cool, I am down with that. Understanding security awareness, okay. We all love and adore our annual security awareness training, right? Yes, we do. And the phishing simulations, we all agree those are the most effective thing in the world, right? Less agreement, okay. So, and a lot of organizations focus on how many people clicked on those emails. If you happen to know, how many of your organizations measure how many people report those emails? A couple of hands. Cool, because a lot of organizations don't. And I bring this up because there's a cultural mindset difference in the organizations who are like, clicking is bad and I must punish the people who click, versus the organizations who are like, it is our job to compensate for the people who click. But also, I need people to report. I need people to report so my security team can learn where our defenses failed and we can make them better. Those are very different organizational mindsets. And that second one, I will take any day of the week. And there's other things that I'm not seeing on a lot of these questionnaires, but things that are extremely important. And so if you have the opportunity to brief your insurance carrier, please, please talk about these things. Talk about your roadmap. If you're an organization that feels that you have arrived at security, like you have achieved security, huzzah, we don't have to do any more security, I have concerns. Whereas if you're an organization that realizes your roadmap never ends, you're gonna update it, but you never completely achieve it, all right, cool, we can have a conversation. And there are technologies that aren't being talked about on all of these questionnaires. I have not once seen any questionnaire talking about ad blocking. I would love if an organization brought out, yeah, we're doing ad blocking. We're doing canaries. We issue password managers and we teach our organizations how to use them. Like an organization that does that, I'm gonna tell my underwriters, you're awesome, these people get it. And let that guide their underwriting decisions. One more note on models, because again, we're in a world of data, and your data is inherently biased based on how it was collected, who collected, under what auspices it was collected. And again, what I've talked about so far is the likelihood that an organization will have an incident, not how bad it will be. Because the ability to predict how bad an incident is right now kind of terrible. There's a couple of organizations that are looking at severity modeling, not just frequency modeling. We're testing them out and we're not getting happy results. And furthermore, it seems like the best indicator for how bad an incident will be is record count, how much data you have, how much PII, PHI, PCI, other private information do you hold? Because again, that guides those regulatory, as fragmented as they are, requirements to report things to states, to notify the affected customers, to have to pay for credit monitoring, all those sorts of things. Just earlier this week, saw news about a company that is declaring bankruptcy because just the notification costs are more revenue than they've made in years, because they have that many people's records that got breached during this incident. According to my claims people, you can, rough math, notification alone, about $1 per person. So if you have, 5 million people's records, just notification, cost of an incident, easily $5 million, just to mail everyone a notice. And again, that's not counting the actual incident response itself. That's not counting the credit monitoring. All of those things have costs. And so if you need dollars to tell your businesses, your organizations to minimize data, if you take nothing else out of that talk, it is the idea that data is nuclear waste. We've gone through this whole thing about the data is the new oil, data is this, data is that. No, data is nuclear waste. Data is liability. And, for the reformed lawyers, data is a thing that can come up in discovery. Just saying. I am not a lawyer, but I am told that is a thing that they care about. So where do we go from here? And so for me as a person in the insurance industry, it's asking better questions. And I'm working on that, but it's a process. Sorry about that. But it involves the insurance industry hiring people like me, the actual experts, in order to advise them. And so, yay, my company did a good first step. But for you and anyone who's seeking insurance, the biggest thing that I can ask of you is a lot of those questionnaires have comment sections. Use them, please. Because a lot of times, especially, the more you get in seniority, the more expert you are, the harder it is to answer a yes or no question. Because the answer is always, it depends. And this is the core problem with audits as well. Like, audits assume a control is applied evenly across the entire organization, and I don't know what organization with more than 20 people that actually works in. So explain to me your exceptions. Tell me why kinda, sorta, mostly, except over here, is your answer. And that gives me the ammunition to talk to the underwriters to say, yeah, they're cool, they get it. Or, that's not a great answer, I recommend proceeding with caution. And so I keep talking about reports and models and all that happiness. This is where I got those from. Clickable versions of all of those links are on my website, which is on the bottom of the page there, tindersgrove.com. I will stand off to the side. Cameras, okay. Oh, one more. So, what are your questions? Yes. Yes.
You mentioned that you love outside driving boxes to be installed in companies.
Mm-hmm.
How far away do you think having an auditor or someone going to analyze the company internally? It seems like you're operating as significant information disadvantage. On the flip side,
yep.
You're the expert in the service, so why not send someone in and say, if you hire this company to dig up their network, we'll give you 20% off?
Yes, so, where are we from being able to do an audit on our potential insureds? Two parts to that. First is, business speak, there's market cycles and stuff. And so the short version of that is right now it is very much a buyer's market. And so if I tried to enforce anything like that, people just run to companies that aren't doing that. So let us set that aside and assume that, the pendulum has swung the other direction. People are pulling out of the insurance market and it becomes much more a seller's market and we can demand more things. In that case, instead of explicitly hiring someone to go into my customers' networks, what I would probably start with is like, hey, you claim to be, 27001 certified, or you've done, your SOC 2 Type 2. Give me the report. A lot of these companies are seeking those sorts of audits, and so that would be a starting point to where I'm not having to expend additional resources except insofar as reading yet more materials in order to assess my organizations. Where that would get really fun is if I can get to the point where I can get, when I say AI, I don't mean LLMs, I mean the entire field of AI, just to be extremely clear here. If we could get that sort of technology to where we could automatically parse things that are semi-structured at best, and to be able to float up the indicators that I most care about, like that would be awesome, but we're definitely a ways away from there. Yes, sir.
I'm having trouble articulating this question, but are you seeing anything inside your organization or others that are offering services to help these companies, any company walk through these questionnaires? Because I have team members that burn a significant amount of time going through with 30 or 40 customers looking at them, let alone the insurance agency. It's strenuous.
Yes, so the question was, do we know of anyone who's providing assistance walking through the questionnaires? I am not familiar with that per se. I will say that in the process of insurance, in theory, the broker is who is working for the customer. Their ability to properly guide the customer, I'm going to go with, they're much more familiar with the insurance business than the cyber business, let us say. So I am not familiar with anyone who is explicitly walking in insurance questionnaires with customers that is reputable at this moment. That being said, I am aware of companies like Red Queen Dynamics that are working on getting to a very, especially for smaller businesses, kind of a, let us translate the human questions into your compliance questions, into your insurance questions, so that when it comes, you have the 70% solution to your insurance questionnaire. I saw another one in back. Yes, sir.
Okay, you were talking about some of the reporting, like click rates for emails.
Yep.
All right, my company's policy is they send out, the phishing emails. The policy is I am to take the email and forward it to a specific mailbox, meaning I don't click on the obvious link.
Yep.
However, I have opened it, which means the script can't invoke.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I point that out, I confuse a lot of people. See, we had some traffic jams go on. They escalated it to some executives. I'm still waiting 9 months later. We're going to have someone to get back to you on that because, so basically, you're saying your policy is to open it. We'll go back to executives that have said, hey, this is important because we want this click rate. As opposed to I get it, delete, done. So some of the things that they want are not always just getting more data, is actually opening up more liability.
Yep. The question was, a lot of corporate policies require opening the email to report it properly, and that can invoke things like tracking pixels and other stuff that runs as soon as you open the email. Depending on how your company measures that click rate, It might mean explicitly clicking on the link within the email. Depends on what technology is being used. I don't know what solution you're using. And I will also, as someone who in a past life got to analyze entirely too many reported phishing emails, point out that if you are literally forwarding, like normal forward email function, you're actually destroying a little bit of evidence. And that's why like the auto plugins, to report phish are really important, because there are technical reasons why that's kind of a terrible mechanism. But ultimately, this gets back to the somewhat perverse incentives, because the people who write a lot of these insurance questionnaires, back to my point there, that first one, they don't actually know what they're doing. And so like I've seen questionnaires asking for like, do you have a minimum number of characters for a password? It doesn't state what that minimum number is. Or it says like 12 or 8, or I've even seen one asking for 6-character minimum passwords. And so we have these terrible incentives because people aren't asking the right question. So it is useful if your company is doing that only for insurance compliance purposes, to be able to say, hey, if you explain why you're not doing that, your insurance might actually be cool with it. They might not, I don't know. I don't know who your insurance is or why they're doing that. But we find a lot of outdated policies in companies, and that is one example of them. I expect that is a terribly unsatisfying answer. Let's go.
You said the number one factor was, how do you say, firmographics?
Firmographics, yes.
Is that type of information like proprietary in what you do? Does like every insurer have like their different chart on it, or is this like a public resource you can find out?
So the general concept of firmographics are number one. I pulled from it was either the top link or the third link. One of those two, one of the Gallagher reports. So that concept is totally out there. Like the precise lines where we cut off risk, like, yeah, that's gonna be model dependent.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
I got a little bit of a silly question, but similar to like car insurance, have you ever seen any cases where someone has been denied coverage, and what were like the situations and what were the lack of controls that led to that sort of?
Yes, denied coverage is absolutely a thing. Insurers are not obligated to insure anyone, because to underwrite your organizations is to accept a certain amount of that risk. That's what risk transference is. You're transferring the risk to the insurance company. And so the underwriter's job is to decide if they're willing to accept that risk or not. And so the Marsh report, using data prioritize cybersecurity investment, literally it gives like 12 key things, the top 6. If you don't have them, Marsh is like not gonna give you the time of day. And so things like not having MFA, really, really terrible credential controls, unpatched systems all over the internet, like, it is very possible to not receive coverage, yes. Yes.
So when it comes to the size of your business, obviously, if revenue plays a very important part on, how big of a target you are, do some of these requirements for underwriting, are they more relaxed for a small business that might not, have the resources, but also is a target?
Do we essentially have different standards for small businesses? Absolutely. I'm working on formalizing some with some of the underwriting leadership within my organization, and ideally that would be like, a quick little like 1-2 page guidance that we could publish. Because yes, small businesses are very different, and what it takes to secure a small business is extremely different. And like, you go to the big trade shows and, you know, try to find a company that will sell less than 100 licenses of anything. It's hard. I know in the back was up earlier.
Yeah, I was just wondering, for the questionnaires, have you ever had cases where you require a questionnaire be filled out by more than one team or people within the company to identify communication issues?
Yep. Do we force questionnaires to be filled out by like different offices? So because of how stuff works, it's usually the broker that is handling getting the questionnaire filled out, and then I get whatever data the broker collected. So what questionnaire I get, what format it is, who filled it out is very much dependent on that broker. I will say that in some organizations, it is very clear who filled out the questionnaire. Just based on the comment style, like I can tell like this was a security person, this was an IT person, this was a lawyer, and all of them are perfectly valid, but they tell me things about that organization and who is trusted to make risk decisions. But I have seen questionnaires where like the name of who answered that particular question is also on the questionnaire, and that was fascinating. I saw another one, yes.
So I'm kind of cheating because I've worked in this industry as well.
Yay!
Everyone's been talking about getting insurance. What they should be really asking about, what do you have to do when you file a claim? Because at the end of the day, that's what's important. And going back to like the standards thing, I have seen cases where we did not have to pay a claim, but we paid anyways. Because we wanted to build a reputation that, hey, cyber insurance is a real thing. So those are all variables we have to keep in mind as well. The claims part is more important than the insurance, in my opinion.
Yep, and so, yeah, claims is a huge part of the insurance process because like, you might be initially getting insurance because of some regulatory or contractual requirement, but at the end of the day, again, it's risk transference. And so having a claims team that you are comfortable with, being able to build a relationship is really valuable. And understanding what your organization wants. If you have a particularly mature security program, then you might just want someone who will cut a check. And that is perfectly fine. If you don't have quite as mature a security program and you want the cyber equivalent of like roadside assistance, like you want to be able to like, look, I have someone on speed dial, and if anything happens, I call them and they will make the breach coach and the lawyers and the incident response team magically appear. Understand that up front when you're insurance shopping, absolutely. And you know, to use something of a cheesy phrase, insurance is weird because, you know, the product is a Word document with some signatures on it. It's a piece of paper. It's a bunch of legalese. But really what the product is a promise that on one of the worst days you can have in your company, it will be a little bit less bad because you've got a partner along with you. And that is as sales pitchy as I am going to get. Are there any other questions? One more.
I know cyber has been growing as a line of business.
Yes.
Roughly speaking, at least for Liberty's sake, where is it in their portfolio? Is it like 5% of business, 20% of business? What do we think 35 years from now, in terms of profession?
Yeah, so where do I see insurance going?
No, sorry, is it in terms of Liberty's business? Is
Right, yeah.
the thing?
Yeah, so like, where do I see cyber going within my company's portfolio?
Niche on
Yeah, our philosophy as of this moment is that you cannot separate cyber from the rest of the world. There are people who posit that, you know, traditionally the base insurance that a company has is P&C, property and casualty. And so that covers a lot of your physical damage and your liability, when people get hurt and stuff like that. A lot of people posit that that will become, in the next few years, PC&C, property, casualty, and cyber, that it is going to be that big. And so while I don't necessarily have numbers to hand, Liberty is absolutely in the, yes, we are all in, we are investing in cyber. And that's why they hired me and all of my peers. And I don't have any open positions yet, sorry, possibly next year. But yeah, it is absolutely an investment. And so we do not see that in the future, cyber is going to be a thing that any organization can avoid. Well, I think that wraps us up for now. If you have any other questions, by all means, hit me up on any of the socials or what have you, and I hope you have a great rest of the con.